What we saw last night at the Footprint Center was nothing short of magic, and on today's episode of Locked On Suns, we'll break it down even more. Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Deandre Ayton, the stars of this team, what did they do to make this happen? And what did it tell us about the rest of this season? Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We are back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Brendon Kleen, a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 6 seasons, and a writer at Suns.com and Dime Magazine. Thank you all for making Locked On Suns your first listen here on this Friday, closing out the week strong. Basketball is back. The Suns are back. Winning is back. And that game was insane on Wednesday night, so do not miss my direct post-game recap show. That will be in your feed. Every game recapped all year long will be in your feed going forward, so hit follow or subscribe, letting me know, and drop me a comment letting me know what we should call this. That's what I want your comment to be today on YouTube. You can also follow along at Locked On PHX Suns, where you can give me your game takes in 7 words or less after every regular season game this year. That will be on Twitter all year long. The name thing, the reason I say that should be the YouTube comment today, folks, is I'm not sure what to call it. I don't know if hangover is the right word, because it's we've had some time. I rewatched this game. I tweeted out some clips. I took it in. I appreciated Devin Booker's magnificence. I looked a little closer at Cameron Johnson's defense. I want these next day shows, especially after big games, to be an appreciation, a deeper understanding, because look, Damian Lee, special moment. Cameron Payne did his thing. The bench was a little weird. You're just hit over the head with all of it on a game night. This is an opportunity to get a better, deeper look at things. So tell me what you think we should call this. I don't think hangover that has a negative connotation, but I don't know. Celebration? Well, they're not always going to be wins, so we'll have to feel that out. Let me know what you guys think. Today's show, guys, brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. More from them later in the show. Now let's dive in. I'm starting with Chris Paul. I told you guys yesterday that I would have more on this situation as I, again, could clear my head a little bit. And I want to read you the quote verbatim because it was directly in a response to a question that I asked of Monty Williams postgame. I didn't have the quote ready last night, but here it is about why. I basically asked him, did you think or expect or plan to, going into the season, have Chris Paul sitting out crunch time as an option? Was that a plan? Was that something going into the year as the coaches are having meetings, training camp is unfolding? Was that something that was in your back pocket that you knew might happen? I didn't ask it in so many words, but that's what I was hoping to get at. And here's what Monty said. He said, quote, "As much as you want to have Chris out there, I know Chris wants to win. And when I took him out, my plan was to get him back in. I didn't think it was that big of a decision, but I guess it is because it's Chris." Now, I believe that Monty doesn't want it to be a big deal. I think he's downplaying it on purpose there, but I think he knows it is, right? So, Chris played 30 minutes last night in the game, and he didn't touch the court again after the 6-minute and 41 mark of the fourth quarter. So that's pretty normal. He played 34 minutes per game last season. He always has come out at that same time, around the 6 or 7 minute mark. Ricky Rubio did the same thing when he was the Suns point guard under Monty. And so you imagine both of those guys have historically checked back in about the 3 or 4 minute mark. That would have gotten Chris right to the 34 minutes per game that he played last year. 30 plus one more stint to close out the game gets you to 34. So we were headed toward a pretty normal thing, but you can't underestimate how big of a statement it is to not bring him back. It's unprecedented. That's what I said to Monty in my question. I'm like, it is pretty remarkable and out of the ordinary that this happened, even if it makes sense in the flow of the game. And it does make sense. Again, the minute stuff, and then the fact that Cameron Payne was playing well. He had 2 big defensive plays. He had one where he was able to fight a little bit against Luka. He had another one where he got the loose ball steal and then threw it off of, I believe, Tim Hardaway, and then it went out of bounds, and he got the crowd fired up. He had a big 3. He had a nice pull-up jumper. I believe he had a layup. So the layup was, I think, closer to the end of the game when Chris would have been back in, but it makes sense during those 3 or 4 minutes when Chris would have had his normal rest. Payne was doing a lot of great things. So it does track, right? What Monty's saying, I'm not arguing with. What I am pushing back on is that, I didn't think it was that big of a decision. You're talking about a Hall of Famer. You're talking about a player whose nickname is literally the point god. And he did not close a game when he was healthy. It might be nothing. It might be something, but it matters. So I want to get out of the way here 5 minutes in. Like, he didn't look cooked or washed, or whatever word you want to use, right? But he definitely never had that takeover moment that we're used to seeing. He did lead a 17-3-ish. That was a long run. That was the one that they flashed up on the screen in the third quarter. He had 5 assists in that stretch. He had a jumper over Josh Green. So that could be, the moment. I think if you're looking at the positives from the game on his part, that's what you'll look at, because his final box score, he was only 1 of 6 from the field. That was the only jumper he made, the only shot he made. And then he had 9 assists, but he had 3 turnovers. So it was really that third quarter where he looked the best. But I also think you got to be honest and say the Mavs weren't really attacking him on defense. Like, they were not forcing him to do a lot. They were not forcing him into switches to try to guard Luka. Overall, I feel like Monty was coaching to win this game much more than Kidd was, and so Paul wasn't exposed, quote-unquote, the same way that he was in those late games in that second-round series where they were pressing him full court and they were trying to get under his skin and they were making him play defense and on and on and on. So that also factors in. This wasn't even the most difficult of tests when it comes to what we've already seen Dallas do, and he still didn't make a big imprint on the game. Despite Monty saying this was not a big decision, it was. I'm just building the case here. This doesn't mean Chris Paul's not closing games anymore or that his career is going downhill, but it does show this. 2 things. Some nights this season, Cameron Payne, who himself is by no means an elite player, lately at least, last season he was not great. This year, we'll see. He may still be, despite not being elite himself, a better option than the All-Star caliber, Hall of Fame caliber, MVP caliber point guard that this team pays $30 million to, right? Just say that, and that illustrates it's a big thing, and it's not necessarily a great sign. And it also just symbolically shows that sitting Chris Paul late in games is now an option, right? It never would have been an option in the past. If you were forecasting out, previewing a game, previewing a playoff series, even sitting watching a game in real time and it's getting close to crunch time, never would it have crossed your mind, well, they might sit Chris Paul here, and then what does that mean? No, it's baked in, built into everything we've ever thought about this Suns team in this era through 2 seasons plus 1 game, that Chris Paul is going to be out there at the end. And he wasn't. And whether that continues, whether it means something grander or it was just a one-off, that hits pretty different than we've ever seen Chris Paul be treated before in terms of playing time, rotation, big moments, and all the rest. Devin Booker was on an absolute tear, a whole other level last night, closing out that game on a night when they needed it, with Chris Paul not himself. We'll talk about his huge performance next. First, today's show, guys, brought to you once again by BetOnline.net, your number one source for betting football and the start of the new basketball season for the rest of this year and beyond. Find the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth analysis on every game. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all sports wagering info all year long, with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. Last night, I was recording around midnight. There was no Friday night Suns game odds yet. Now there are. You can get the Suns at -4, favored by 4 points on the road in Portland. That's -112 odds. I think they'll cover that personally. They lost a clunker last year, this same exact game, the second game of the year in Portland. So maybe you feel a little uneasy. I think they figured some things out in that second half. I don't think Portland is a terrifying team. 4 points isn't a lot. There you go. Keep track of the Suns all year long and all the rest of the basketball that this league has to offer. And do it at BetOnline. Head to the website today or use your mobile app to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. Devin Booker, last night, huge, elite, 28 points on 50% shooting from the field, 7 of 7 from the free throw line, and then as a playmaker, 9 assists versus just 2 turnovers. He ran the offense from about the 4-minute mark of the third quarter on Chris Paul. He actually started to handle the ball a few possessions when Chris Paul was still in the game. Then Paul checked out, Payne came in, and at any point when Payne and Booker were on the floor together, it was going to be Booker initiating, running the offense. Payne is basically now in this system, in this roster, a secondary ball handler, a floor spacer, an energy guy. He is no longer the backup point guard, quote unquote. Mostly, that was Devin Booker in this game. He actually also missed 3 layups in this game, and he only took 1 3-pointer. So when you think about it that way, like the numbers could have been even bigger. Like, you know, if he took a couple more 3s instead of 2s, and then he made those 3 layups, you're talking about, 30 plus, 35 points. So elite stuff. But he was even better, I think, than those numbers indicate. And honestly, to me, I'm not saying this was the best game he's ever played in his career, but what he did late in the game, orchestrating, puncturing this Mavericks defense and coming back and then taking the lead and then winning. Again, it wasn't a playoff game. I do think Jason Kidd was playing things cooler than Monty was. I think the Suns players were playing harder than the Mavs players, but you can't take anything away from what Booker did. It feels like if this is a sign of things to come, he is leveling up yet again. That shouldn't surprise anybody, but it's still awesome to see. The Suns ran, late in this game, a double drag type of pick and roll. So basically that just means there's 2 screeners instead of just 1 in a pick and roll. Those guys were Damian Lee and Deandre Ayton. Now, we've seen this in the past. We've seen it with Cam Johnson as that second screener. We've seen it with Mikal Bridges, even Devin Booker sometimes, when Chris Paul might be handling the ball. And they just spammed it. They just ran it over and over and over in the fourth quarter. And it did a couple of things. I think it made Luka play defense because Luka was guarding Lee. And so when you have those 2 screens and you have a good ball handler like Booker manipulating those screens, the defense has to make a choice, right? The defense has to decide how it's going to guard that screen. What is that third guy going to do? A lot of the time, teams will switch that. But that's hard. That's hard, especially when one of those defenders of the screeners is Luka, who is expending so much energy on offense, is not an incredibly long or athletic or physical defender when he's having to move on the floor. And so the Mavs didn't really switch it fully. They basically were hedging the big man defender. So the guy guarding Ayton was stepping out to get in Booker's way, prevent him from just driving down the middle of the lane. And then allowing his defender, which I believe most of the time during that stretch was Tim Hardaway, it might have been different guys at different points, to recover, and then they were having Luka flare out. So they were basically guarding it traditionally. Everybody was staying with their man, and then that was requiring Spencer Dinwiddie, who was guarding from the corner, to rotate over and be the helper. And so you can see where this is going. You suddenly have the big man stepping out onto the perimeter. You have Spencer Dinwiddie, of all people, suddenly being the rim protector. And then you have Luka trying to zone up on the backside of all of that and guard both three-point shooters. So Lee and the guy that Dinwiddie was guarding, which I believe was Payne. This is not good, right? And so that was how you saw Deandre Ayton getting paint points, which the Suns had 56 of overall in this game. You saw an open shot for Damian Lee. You saw Booker getting into the paint and scoring, or getting to mid-range and scoring. And Booker's ability to manipulate all of that and process it and adjust, right? Like, you can see some guards, if their coach or the other players around them allow for something to be exploited, right? Like, that would have worked against the Mavs, even if maybe Cameron Payne was handling the ball. It would have worked a little bit. It would have worked to some extent. Booker took it to another level because he didn't allow them to know what was coming. He didn't take the ball into his own hands too much and, force things. Or he just took what was coming, exploited the fact that it was a bad play for the Mavs to defend, and just dominated. The Mavs love to switch and stay home on shooters. That was a big part of how they were able to destroy the Suns late in that last series. And it's not always that. Sometimes they actually don't stay home on shooters. That was happening too. But they like to basically keep things simple. They don't love to be a team that exposes themselves and then requires a bunch of rotating and everything else if they can avoid it. They like to switch. That's their base. And so by doing this, the Suns were forcing the Mavs to rotate. It was something they had a really hard time doing in that last series because the Suns shooters just weren't threatening enough. And Chris Paul eventually wasn't threatening enough, so they could just sell out on Devin Booker, or they could switch and they could say, okay, beat us, and nobody could. And so Booker became the guy to impose bad situations on Dallas. I know I'm going on, and it wasn't just this one set, but it was just illustrated so beautifully in that fourth quarter that, if you have League Pass or you have even an ESPN subscription and you can log on online, rewatch it on ESPN.com, they have all their games available for replay. Just sit back and rewatch that fourth quarter. It was as good as any movie that I've seen all year long. So, as far as what this means, it's game one, I'm not going to overreact, but the ability, once again, just to repeat this, to switch between roles, whether it's scoring off the ball early in the game or then creating for himself at times and then playmaking for others, and just fluidly to the point you don't even notice him doing those different things, is what the best players do. The Suns will start to also see him as their late game orchestrator, because the other part of the Chris Paul sitting thing is that it put the ball in Booker's hands. And so it's almost less to me about Payne in terms of what the long-term ramifications of Paul sitting in this game might be. And it's honestly more of the passing of that torch to say, late in games, when we need points, when we need to close out, Booker is going to be the guy to initiate, to orchestrate, to create. And on top of all of that, doing these different things, being heady and adjusting in real time, he's efficient. He's shooting 50% from the field. He's only getting 2 turnovers. He's getting to the free throw line and making his free throws. He was already All-NBA last year. He was already an MVP candidate. But I've been saying that if he can morph some of the scoring and savvy that he's developed with Chris Paul with what he was next to Ricky Rubio as a playmaker and a ball handler, this could be yet another pretty decent jump up for him, and it feels like if last night was any indication, we could be headed there. I want to close out the show talking about Deandre Ayton. We forget about him way too often, but he was excellent in this game, playing a ton of minutes in the second half, moving on from some foul trouble, and making a difference on both ends. So we'll get to him after one more quick break. Deandre Ayton in this opening night win played 30 minutes. He had 18 points, 10 rebounds, and he had foul trouble early in this game. That's why you saw 7 minutes from Bismack Biyombo, who did not show up in the second half. You saw 10 minutes from Jock Landale, who only played one of those minutes in the second half. And yet, after all of that, Deandre Ayton exceeded last year's minutes per game of 29.5 by playing basically the entire second half. Those 55 seconds of Jock Landale were the only time Ayton was sitting in the entire second half. Not fourth quarter, second half. He played 23 minutes and 5 seconds in the second half. He had high energy, high intensity, high focus all night long, which, I don't even mean that to patronize or condescend him, but for any big man, that's necessary. Look no further than Joel Embiid, who in the opening night loss that Philadelphia had to Boston, people were criticizing him for being tired in the fourth quarter, hands on his knees, not engaging, not being aggressive. So that's not me being like, good job, Ayton, you you played hard. Like, that's not me setting a very low bar and congratulating him for crossing it, meeting it. It's really just appreciating that he did that. And then also, I think another big part, especially when you do think back to the playoff series last year, Ayton was able to make a big impact against all three of the Mavs bigs. Maxi Kleber, JaVale McGee. JaVale was just bad in this game. Just bad. 3 points, 4 rebounds. He missed 3 of his 4 free throws. He had 2 turnovers, and he was a -5, only played 14 minutes. They thought they were getting a Dwight Powell upgrade. I'm not so sure they were. Ayton dominated him. And then Christian Wood, who was excellent. And I think Jason Kidd sitting him was a mistake and one of the turning points in this game. But Ayton was able to make an impact against all 3 of those guys, whereas at times against the Mavs last year, he wasn't asserting himself when the Mavs went small. He wasn't getting the ball. He wasn't doing what he needed to do when he got the ball. And tonight, or on Wednesday night, he did all of that. So, onto the defense. I think this is the part. The offense is really, sexy to look at when it comes to Ayton, because he'll have these nights where he looks like Amari Stoudemire, and then you'll have these nights where it looks like the Suns guards forgot he's on the team. And what he does to chisel out a role and increase and improve his production, and will he shoot threes, will he not shoot threes, why doesn't he draw fouls? It's more exciting to talk about. But his defense continues to get better, and the Suns would not be this type of team. They would not be as good of a team or the type of team that they are without him. The numbers showed that last night. Ayton was a plus 15 while he was on the floor, so the Suns outscored the Mavs by 15 during the 30 minutes that Ayton was out there. While Biyombo was out there for his 7 minutes, the Suns were outscored by 7. While Landale was out there for his 10 minutes, the Suns were outscored by 6. So there were 0 blocks tallied up for Ayton. This has been I know Brandon Duenas at Zona Sports has been a critic of the Suns' home scorekeeper for years because of this. They never give Ayton blocks, even when you could easily give him the credit and nobody would bat an eye. But he was the only big man on this Suns roster who could contain Christian Wood. He had at least 2 or 3, we'll call them deterrences, because I guess they weren't blocks. And Cam Johnson actually had 2 blocks. Mikal Bridges was he was everywhere. He's such a brilliant player. You go back and watch, and a massive part of the reason that Bridges and Johnson had the defensive impact that they did last night is because they know Ayton is on that back line. His rotations are always going to be sound. His reaction time, his rotation speed, his length, his IQ, all of it makes up for it. It doesn't make up for it, because it's not like Johnson and Bridges are making mistakes, but they're able to be more aggressive. They're able to cover more ground because they know they don't have to worry so much about a player maybe getting a few steps further than they're thinking he might, because they know if that happens, Ayton's going to be there. And you cannot underestimate his defense. It was excellent last night. So again, we did this with Paul, we did this with Booker. Not to overreact, but what does all of this mean? I think playing heavy minutes, shouldering a bigger load, and producing in the box score, that's going to result in a better season. Like, I think he should be getting more opportunities to create. Monty had some strange quotes. Tim McMahon from ESPN asked Monty about what Ayton can do or should do to increase his production and his role on this team. Monty sort of backtracked from what he had said on Media Day and at various times in the preseason. On Media Day, he's talking about, allowing Ayton to be more of a creator and facilitator from the elbow, saying Ayton can take 1 or 2 threes a game, and that he sees an all-star possibility with the production increasing. And then last night, I don't think he needs to increase anything. So, very strange. I think we should be seeing that. We don't know if we will. But doing a little bit of everything is kind of always what made Ayton special, and he's just multiplying that out further as he gets older. At this point, we talked about the defense. Opposing defenses, though, when Ayton is on offense, they just don't know what to do when Ayton catches the ball. Whether it's on the short roll or it's, in a mismatch situation in the post, whatever it might be, they don't know whether he's going to go to the hook, one dribble layup or dunk, settle into the post and, figure something out there, or pass out of it and make the right read. He's just getting really, really hard to guard. He's anchoring a high-level defense. Like, he is the real deal, and he looks like he's on track to play more minutes this year. I made a prediction earlier this week in my, 3 bold predictions show on Monday saying Ayton will make an all-star team. This did not change my opinion on that at all. If anything, it reinforced it. So, very, very good way to start the season, needless to say. Portland on Friday. I believe the Clippers on Saturday. Now I'm second-guessing myself a little bit. I will be back, yes, the Clippers on Sunday on the road. I will be back right after that Clippers game to recap it, along with the Blazers game. If something crazy happens in the Portland game, who knows? Maybe I'll do a bonus episode. So keep it right here. Hit follow, hit subscribe. Do not miss a show. And in the meantime, catch up with Locked On NBA to get the lowdown on everything else you need to know around the league.